Hello, everyone. Welcome. I've lost my voice a bit, so forgive me for sounding like a frog. I'm Rita McGrath, and welcome to a Friday Fireside Chat. My guest this week is the author of many books, but the one that we're going to really focus on is his most recent one, The Death of Truth, which I have right here. It is absolutely fascinating. So Stephen Brill is a founder of many different kinds of organizations, most notably the co-founder and co-CEO of an entity called NewsGuard that rates the reliability of websites and other online content. So Stephen, welcome.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
So for those of you that may be watching this, not now, this is being taped in the week after the election. Which I imagine, Stephen, you have some points of view on it. Are there any top of the mind reactions?
Well, just that there was the usual, unfortunately, now the usual amount of misinformation and disinformation coming from both sides. When we were monitoring what was going on platforms on election night, up until about 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock, there were all kinds of hoaxes going up about the election being fixed in favor of Kamala Harris. And by 11 o'clock, there were people online saying that she shouldn't concede because Trump had fixed the election and rigged the election. So in the business we're in of trying to monitor misinformation and disinformation online, it's something engaged in by people on both sides of the aisle. I think there's been more of it on the Trump side than on the Harris side, but there are pockets where the left is more active than the right. For example, left-wing political action committees have taken over or started hundreds of news sites or sites posing as local news sites in the United States that are really financed by political action committees and Democratic operatives, and they specialize in writing, puff pieces about Democratic candidates and negative pieces about Republican candidates. They're about the same number on the right that do the opposite. And then there's a new player that we noticed this year, which is the Russians. The Russians, principally in the persona of a guy named John Dugan, who used to be a deputy sheriff in Palm Beach, Florida, was indicted for computer hacking and other crimes, and fled to Moscow, where he got asylum, and has set up a studio in Moscow where he creates all varieties of Russian disinformation, including launching what are now 170 websites in the United States with names like the Chicago Record or the Boston News that look like local news sites, except they're just filled with, Russian disinformation.
Wow, that is something. So I think it might benefit our audience to sort of, so as I'm here with Stephen Brill, the author of The Death of Truth. But what I love about the book, and I really did like the book, it's engaging. I mean, it's a great book about a very disturbing topic. But what I love about the book is it really unpacks where we are in a way that's very approachable and easy to understand. And I guess the overarching problem is you identified that greed has really led people to create products that don't put safety and civil society first. So I think maybe it might make sense to walk through that journey. And I think if you could tell us the story behind Section 230, because it came as a surprise to me. I had no idea where that came from.
Sure. Let me unpack your question a little bit. So what I really emphasize in the book is that there are three forces that have combined to create a world in which people just instinctively don't believe in facts. And in fact, I open the book with a scene going back 25 years ago or actually 30 years ago, when my daughter was in grade school, and my wife and I went for Parents' Day, and it was a math class. And the teacher asked one of the kids in the class, luckily not my daughter, how much is 6 times 7? And the kid responded, 41. And the teacher said, I disagree. And all the parents in the room, just sort of looked at each other. We rolled our eyes. I mean, how can you disagree? I mean, 6 times 7 is either 41 or it's not 41. And that was, kind of funny. But today, nobody in our society, or not enough people in our society, agree on a basic set of facts. Who won an election? Will a COVID vaccine kill you? Did Colin Powell die from a COVID vaccine? No, he didn't. Was 9/11 an inside job by the Bush administration? Just, basic facts. And how has that happened? Well, there was always misinformation and disinformation out there dating to, ancient times. And, certainly in the McCarthy era in the United States in the 1950s, there was misinformation. But what changed was social media. Because social media, the good news about social media, social media platforms, is that anybody can be a publisher. The dominance of, that we saw in the 1960s and 70s of, 3 broadcast networks, and then a couple of cable channels, and 3 or 4 prominent print publishing companies who basically dominated public opinion, dominated what we knew. That wasn't such a good thing, because a lot of voices weren't heard, and a lot of conventional wisdom, which they had a monopoly over, was wrong. But what's been replaced by that, again, is the internet, where anybody can be a publisher reaching billions of people. And so the good news about the internet is anybody can be a publisher. The bad news about the internet is anybody can be a publisher. So the social media platforms realize this, and they exist purely on advertising revenue. Who can get the most eyeballs? And they figured out that the most eyeballs are attracted to the most inflammatory subjects and comments. It's sort of like, we all know we're not supposed to rubberneck at a car accident, but we all rubberneck at a car accident. And then we get angry at the people in front of us who are rubbernecking, and then we do the same thing, and the people behind us get angry at us, and then they rubberneck. People are lured toward the sensational, the inflammatory. But to come back to your question about Section 230, we now think of Section 230, those who are aware of it, as a federal legislation passed in 1996 that basically said that if you have a social media platform, what citizens post on that platform, the platform can't be responsible for it, shouldn't be responsible. And the analogy was, should the phone company be responsible for something I say to you in a telephone call? Or should a mailman be responsible, for delivering you a letter that has something, libelous in it? Obviously not, because what does the mailman know? He doesn't know what's in the letter. So in 1996, this is before there were really social media platforms. That's really the point here. But in 1996, there were nascent social media platforms whose names you and I may remember, but probably half your listeners, viewers, have never heard of. AOL, America Online, CompuServe, and Prodigy were the 3.
Yeah, I was going to say.
And I actually struggled to remember the 3 names. But in 1996, these were prominent, not quite social media platforms. They were online hubs, and you basically signed up for AOL to use email. And you had to go through a telephone line. But in order to create more value. You had to pay for it too. There was nothing anonymous about it. There was nothing spontaneous. You had to sign up and pay and get an AOL account. They knew who you were. And to get more people to join, they created these chat centers. So they created a chat group for people who were enthusiastic about baseball, or maybe even enthusiastic about the Yankees. They created a chat group for recipes and cooking, and a chat group for finance. Just hundreds of common interest groups. And as that grew, every once in a while, someone would come on and post something for the group to read that was libelous. And there were two cases that happened at about the same time. In one case, I think it involved Prodigy, but I could be mixing them up. Someone posted something really libelous and defamatory about someone else in the world of stocks and finance. And that person sued. And the judge said, since I think it was Prodigy, since they made a big deal of the fact that we screen our content in these chat rooms, and we're careful about it, and we give you a quality experience, the court ruled that since they do screen the content, they could be held responsible for the defamatory content. In the other case of the other company with chat rooms, they said, well, we don't screen anything. And the court said, well, since you don't claim to screen anything, you're not liable. Well, that seemed like kind of a perverse result. Someone who's trying to do the right thing and have only good content is liable, and someone who says we don't care, anybody can come on and say anything, is not liable. So Congress.
That surprised me. That really surprised me. I did not know that before. So
Congress, in 3 paragraphs of something called the Telecommunications Act, which was a giant piece of legislation, hundreds of pages, really meant to regulate for the first time since the 1930s the whole communications landscape in the United States, which included now cell phones and cable television. None of that had been regulated because none of it existed when the Federal Communications Act was passed. So this was this giant telecommunications regulatory bill, hundreds of pages. But at the last minute, Congress added these 3 paragraphs known as Section 230 because this new problem had arisen in this new thing called AOL, Prodigy, and CompuServe. And what Section 230 said was, you can't be held liable for what people post on a social media platform, even if you do screen it. And the idea was to encourage these companies to try to screen the content. And if they tried to screen it and something got by, they wouldn't have to suffer. Whereas before, if they didn't try to screen it, was the only way they wouldn't have to suffer. So it was actually called, if you can believe it, the Good Samaritan Act, because the Good Samaritans were the companies who were going to be screening the content and keeping bad stuff off. So as I point out in the book, in 1996, when he was 12 years old, Mark Zuckerberg was crowned a Good Samaritan. So cut to the early 2000s, when social media platforms as we now know them, Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, you name it, they started to flourish. And their business model wasn't to get people to sign up to pay. Their business model, as I mentioned, was advertising. So they gradually figured out that they could adjust the algorithms, which was a relatively new word in those days, to show people content that was inflammatory and that they agreed with. And the insight they had was that people tend to want to watch and read stuff that confirms their opinions that they like. I mean, it's like, I'm a Yankees fan. If the Yankees are winning a game, I'll just keep watching. If they start losing, not only won't I watch, but I won't read any accounts of the game afterwards or anything because I don't want to hear about it. Well, that's the way most people are in a lot of aspects of their life. So they created these algorithms, which created the first of the three forces I'm talking about, which is an information ecosystem where people, as they increasingly went online for their news, and now that is the dominant place most people get news, they were seeing the most inflammatory stuff, not calm stuff. And there's a woman I write about in the book who ultimately became an activist for reform, who she's living out in California. She has a newborn baby, and she goes online, just to find out, what's the vaccine regimen I should have for my newborn baby. And she's stunned to see that what she's getting is all this crazy vituperative anti-vax stuff, not something calmly presented by a doctor saying, here's what you should do, here are the benefits, etc. And so she asks around. She has a lot of friends in the tech community. She's in the tech community herself. And she says, what's up with your algorithm? I'm just seeing all this crazy, nutty stuff. And they basically tell her, well, that's how it is. So that's the first thing, is the way we get news is owned by people who have every incentive, monetary incentive, to just keep showing you inflammatory and crazy stuff. And that is still the case, but they have Section 230 to hide behind. Section 230 doesn't hold them responsible. And the closest they come to responsibility is that every year or two, Mark Zuckerberg gets called before Congress, and they're very angry, and he apologizes. This has been happening since 2018.
We need to do better. We need to do better.
We're sorry. We know we need to do better. And by the way, did we mention that we're really, really sorry? And we know we have to do better, and we're working on it. And then the next year he comes and says, we're really sorry. We know we have to do better. And they just keep doing that. And they still, just keep doing that. Although today they even do a lot less of their meager efforts to look at their content, because when Elon Musk took over Twitter, he got rid of all the people who tried to moderate the content, tried usually unsuccessfully, and that gave the others more permission to ease up on what already were their kind of performative, lackadaisical efforts to do this. So that's the first thing, is what's going on online. The second thing was also a technological breakthrough, which was called programmatic advertising. And what programmatic advertising means is that 80-90% of all the advertising that we now see is done programmatically, which means it's done by computer and it's done online, or it's done over the top televisions, sometimes even podcasts. And what it does is it creates a situation where what the advertiser is looking for is to reach a certain demographic. I'm a BMW, and I want to reach males of a certain age, living in certain places, who've gone online and looked at car ads and might subscribe, to some online sites that are, that deal with cars. I just create a profile, or I'm a hotel company. I want to reach people who have taken 4 business trips in the last year and have stayed at, 4 luxury hotels and are between the ages of, 35 and 50. That's my demo. So by hoovering up all this data on people, the programmatic advertising machine can basically create an auction where the advertiser, through the ad agency, basically has people that can sit literally at a switchboard on a laptop and check all the boxes that describe you and say, I want to reach that person. But guess what? I don't care where I reach that person. I don't care if I reach that person on the New York Times or if I reach that person on InfoWars. Doesn't matter to me. And InfoWars is going to cost me less money. So every second of our lives, literally every second, some 500,000 ads are placed through this auction process around the world with no regard for what the content is. So to give you an example of the real world ramifications of this, remember when Nancy Pelosi's husband was attacked in their apartment in San Francisco? The night he was attacked, there was a phony local news site that NewsGuard had identified previously as being, basically a hoax site that was posing as a local news site called the Santa Monica Observer. And we had identified it because in years prior, for example, it had run a banner story about how Hillary Clinton had died in 2016, and a body double had substituted for her in her debate with Donald Trump. So this is the quality of the site you're talking about. As soon as news came of the attack on Mr. Pelosi, the Santa Monica Observer ran a banner story saying that he actually was the victim of an encounter with a gay prostitute. And as soon as that went up online, he tweeted, the Santa Monica Observer, put a link to that in Twitter. Elon Musk noticed it. He retweeted it. Donald Trump Jr. noticed it. He retweeted it. And what they retweeted was the headline and the link to the Santa Monica Observer website. So what happened? Suddenly the Santa Monica Observer website had hundreds of thousands of eyeballs to offer that night that it otherwise wouldn't have had. And in the auction process for programmatic advertising, advertisers, blue chip advertisers, whose names you would recognize, whether it's Hertz or Target or you name it, their ads were all appearing on that website next to the story about the attack on Mr. Pelosi. Those ads did not appear. Let's say the advertiser was trying to reach people on the West Coast. Those ads did not appear in the San Francisco Chronicle story, which was the real story of what happened to Mr. Pelosi. And that's a newspaper that actually pays reporters to write stories instead of people to make them up. So they didn't get the ads. The Santa Monica Observer got the ads.
And they make money from that.
And they make a ton of money. I mean, the cash register just rings. So programmatic advertising encourages the very same thing that the online social media platforms encourage. I mean, I'll give you another example that's in the book. A couple of years ago, the largest single advertiser on Sputnik News, which is the Russian propaganda site, the largest single advertiser was Warren Buffett, the icon of American capitalism, because he owns
Geico.
Yeah, he owns Geico, which is a big advertiser, and Geico is government employees' insurance company. So to add to the irony, a company founded to provide low-cost insurance to members of the government and the military who were fighting our enemies in World War II is now indirectly helping to finance Russian propaganda. Nobody planned that. Warren Buffett has no idea his ad was appearing there. His ad agency had no idea. That's the nature of programmatic advertising. So that's the second force that has, brought us to the point where we are. And the third force are the rise of, demagogic, politicians who are ready, willing, and able to take advantage of this vacuum of belief in the truth by substituting their own false narratives, and people are willing to listen to them because, as much as we might not like to admit it, although maybe after this last election we'll be more ready to admit it, the system has stopped working for a large group of people in our middle class and our lower middle class, and certainly our lower class, economically. The system is not working for them, and they are not eager, but certainly willing to grasp at alternatives. And if they see a story that says that that COVID is a hoax, at the same time that their businesses, the places where they work, have been shut down because of COVID, that's a myth that they might be willing to believe. If they think that Donald Trump is the answer, and then they see stories as they did 4 years ago, just everywhere, that the election was stolen, you have the phenomenon of law-abiding, decent people ending up with coat racks as weapons inside the Capitol. And there are people I profile in the book who really are those people. They'd never. One guy he'd never been to Washington. He'd never even gotten a speeding ticket. He was a graduate of Ohio State, lived in Columbus, Ohio, worked for a pest control company. But guess what? During COVID, people weren't letting exterminators into their homes, to exterminate. So he lost his job, and he was home, didn't have a lot to do, spent a lot of time online, going down, the proverbial rabbit hole of misinformation and disinformation, including about the election. And he ended up arrested in the Capitol building. So that's what I think has happened to us.
So for those of you just joining us, my guest this week is Stephen Brill. We're talking about his book, The Death of Truth. And we're talking about it just after the major American election. So let's talk about NewsGuard. I'd love to hear more about what you thought when you founded it and what you've learned since.
Sure. NewsGuard gave me the kind of front row seat that I used to write this book. The idea behind NewsGuard, as you know, I've been in journalism all my life. The idea behind NewsGuard is to use journalists to solve the problem of misinformation and disinformation online. Everybody has thought before we launched that this was a technology problem, that you could use artificial intelligence to root out misinformation and disinformation. You can probably use artificial intelligence if you wanted to online, and there are advertising technology companies that do this to keep ads off of pornography and even some kind of hate speech sites, because you can program you can program a machine to spot pornography. You can program it with words that'll spot hate speech. You can't do it to understand the difference between cancer.org, which is the website of the American Cancer Society, and cancer.news, I think it is, which is a website that if you go to, it sort of looks like the American Cancer Society. Very calm speech, no crazy words in headlines, no hate speech, and very calmly tells you that if you have cancer, your oncologist is ripping you off. And if you buy a monthly subscription to this package of apricot pits, that will cure your cancer. That has many times the online traffic as the American Cancer Society does. So that's the kind of problem we were trying to solve. And that you can solve by having people, human beings, especially human beings who are trained as journalists, look at websites and rate their reliability and identify the ones that aren't reliable. So what we decided to do was launch something that was strictly apolitical, had nothing to do with politics, but use 9 basic journalistic criteria. Each of them weighted a little bit differently, but to create a point score of 0 to 100. And sites would be rated based on how they met the criteria. Does the site have a corrections policy? That's one, basic journalistic standard. If you get something wrong, you tell your readers you got it wrong, and you explain how you got it wrong. Do the site's headlines match the story, or the headlines, clickbait? Does the site repeatedly publish provably false news? And that may sound hard, but what that's really going after is the difference between a site that says that apricot pits cure cancer and a site that says there are lots of things that may cure cancer, but apricot pits is not one of them. And that obviously, that one of the 9 criteria has a very high weight. So we have now rated and we continually update reliability ratings for all the news and information websites responsible for 95% of online engagement in the 11 countries where we operate. Obviously the US and Canada, but several countries in Europe, New Zealand, Australia, Ukraine. So that's the idea. And what we do is we give the site a rating, and we publish a nutrition label, which in 3,000 to 5,000 words explains with total transparency how we rated the site according to the 9 criteria, who rated the site. We always call for comment before we say anything bad about anybody, because that's what journalists do. Algorithms don't call for comment. And we knew we had to be totally apolitical and totally transparent, and we've pretty much done that. Now, the cost of doing that is that we've been attacked from the left by some sites on the left that we've given low ratings to, such as the MSNBC.com website, and the sites on the right that we've given low ratings to. So we're sort of equal opportunity
offenders,
you could say. So what's the business model for that? Well, we originally thought the business model would be that if we created this, we have a browser extension that you can buy, which is, we really just did as a demonstration. But if you're using the browser extension, whenever you do a Google search or look at a Facebook feed or a YouTube feed or a Twitter feed, if it refers to something that has a URL, a website, our little icon would be there, and you'd click on it and you'd see the rating, and then you could click through and see the entire nutrition label. So originally we thought, well, this is easy. Facebook, this is 2018-19 when we started. Facebook is spending, $5 million a year on PR firms, probably $10 million a year on lobbyists, and another $10 million on lawyers to deal with this problem that they have, this reputational problem and the threat of regulation, all the lawsuits, because they're not telling readers what they can rely on and what they can't rely on. So for a fraction of that, they'll license our data and they'll incorporate it. So whenever you looked at a Facebook feed, you wouldn't have to have our browser extension. Facebook would just put our icon there and you could click on it. And we thought, obviously Twitter would do the same thing. YouTube would do the same thing. And we were just incredibly stupid because when we started, we didn't realize that the last thing they wanted to do was solve that problem. The last thing they wanted to do was tell their users, this inflammatory content that we're sending you, don't pay any attention to it. In fact, don't retweet it. Don't share it because it's unreliable. Microsoft, however, did license us from the very beginning, and people who use the Edge browser, can see our ratings. And we also were able to develop a business in the advertising community where There are some ad agencies, lots of them now, and some ad tech companies that use our data and use our ratings. What we also developed at the same time were something called misinformation fingerprints. And what that is a catalog of all the false narratives we see. So in other words, if we're rating a site that says that apricot pits cure cancer, we're trying to say this site, publishes, provably false news. We have to back it up in our nutrition label. So we say, for example, they said apricot pits, will cure cancer. Then we go on in the next paragraph and debunk that and say, actually, apricot pits, don't cause cancer according to the CDC and the NIH, blah, blah, blah. Here's what the truth is. That false narrative is now one of 3,000 in our catalog of false narratives, and we made it so that it's also machine readable. And what that has given us is a way to track where the false narratives began, track where they're going. So there's some false narratives, the very high portion of state-sponsored disinformation false narratives have been useful to elements of the national security community who have licensed those fingerprints related to Russian and Iranian and Chinese disinformation to get an early warning about them and to track where they started and where they're going. The other thing that happened, which we can't say we planned, because God knows we didn't, is that generative AI. What we've all been reading is that they tend to provide all kinds of crazy answers to questions. They hallucinate, and that's because the way a chatbot works is it scans the entire internet, and the more that the words on the internet, which are called tokens in AI speak, which is to say, sequential arrangements of letters, the more the content on there might be unreliable. If there's a lot of it, the chatbot might spit it out. So, for example, if you ask a chatbot, are NATO troops fighting in Ukraine? NATO troops are not fighting in Ukraine, but the only stuff online that says that looks at that question are Russian disinformation sites, which are writing articles saying there are NATO troops fighting in Ukraine. The New York Times isn't writing an article saying there aren't NATO troops fighting in Ukraine, because everybody knows there aren't NATO troops fighting in Ukraine. Why would that be news? So the upshot of that is that if you ask one of these chatbots, are NATO troops fighting in Ukraine, it is likely to say, yeah, NATO troops are fighting in Ukraine. And the sort of more general point is that if you're just scanning the entire internet looking for these tokens, these words, you're going to pay as much attention to words coming from RT and Sputnik and InfoWars as you are from The Economist. In fact, there was a story in the Washington Post a year and a half ago that got a hold of the way one of the chatbots is doing this, and discovered that they use more tokens from RT than they do from The Economist. So where does NewsGuard come in? We're now talking to these generative AI companies, and we've gotten two of them to start licensing our data to basically for two reasons. One is, if you have our data, you know that The Economist gets a higher rating, a higher point score than InfoWars. So you can train the machine to pay more attention to a high scoring site than a low scoring site. So that has to do with using our data to train generative AI. The second thing, remember those that catalog of false narratives I told you about. There's something else in the generative AI world called guardrails, and guardrails are what happens at the end of the process before the machine spits out an answer. The guardrails basically say, well, whatever you're about to say, don't say this. No matter what you think you know, don't say this. So, for example, among our 3,000 false narratives, one of them is, that Hank Aaron and Colin Powell did not die from COVID vaccines, which were, are popular, disinformation false narratives. So if a chatbot incorporates our misinformation fingerprints, which are our false narratives, as guardrails, it will never say that Colin Powell died from a COVID vaccine, no matter what the process is by which they were trained. That's sort of a fail-safe. So we've discovered that is another pretty significant business for us.
I'm so thrilled you're doing this. I really am. So Sylvia, one of our listeners, was asking a question that I was going to get to too, which is, so how do we begin to fix this, especially given the interests of the current regime that's being nominated, that kind of has been elected by people who are scared and pissed off, I think is the term that you used.
Well, one of the things I suggest in the book, and whether a new administration will want to do this is a question, but the current administration hasn't done it either, which I think is incomprehensible. And that is, when you sign up for Facebook or YouTube, you get something called the terms of service, right? We all know that. And if you read the terms of service, it says, we won't tolerate, Facebook does not tolerate state-sponsored disinformation, harmful misinformation, hate speech, a whole litany of things it won't tolerate. And you're agreeing to certain things on your end that you won't do at Facebook. But one of the terms of service is, Facebook won't tolerate this stuff. But they do tolerate it, obviously, we know that. Their answer has always been, and same thing with YouTube, is, well, the nature of social media platforms is, again, everybody gets to be everybody gets to be a publisher. And how are we supposed to, we try as hard as we can. Remember Mark Zuckerberg saying, we're trying really hard. We're sorry. We're trying as hard as we can. But if 3,000 people a minute are posting videos on our service, we can't catch it all. Well, that sounds reasonable until you sort of step back and say, who died and said your business model has to be the 3,000 people, can post every minute? And the analog I use in the book is, suppose you had a movie theater or a restaurant. Whenever you walk into a movie theater, if you look on, one wall or the other, there's a little sign from the fire commissioner that says occupancy by more than 600 people is dangerous and unlawful. Suppose the owner of the movie theater said, well, actually 6,000 people want to come watch this movie at 8:00 on Saturday night. So I'm going to let them stand in the aisles and sit down in the aisles and even, just crowd as many people as I can, because all these people want to watch the movie. What am I supposed to do? Turn them away? Can't turn them away. The owner of that movie theater would be arrested. I mean, it'd be fine, but if he kept doing it, he'd be arrested. Same thing with a restaurant. So many people want to eat my food that even though the fire marshal has said that given the size of the space and the number of exit doors, I can only have, 140 people here, but 600 people want to come. So, I've got to let them come. No one would tolerate that. Or suppose someone running a car company like Tesla. Suppose someone running a car company said, so many people want to buy this car that I really can't slow down the process by installing those pesky seat belts and airbags. No one would tolerate that. And yet the online business model is as many people can come as want to come, even if we can't control the consequences of that. And so let's come back to my point about the terms of service. They can control the consequences of it. Their terms of service promise that they will, and they're not. Now, Facebook has been successfully sued by the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, for violating their privacy promises, which are also in those terms of service, same exact terms of service. The FTC could easily sue Facebook this afternoon for violating its terms of service in terms of promising people that they're trying as hard as they can to create an environment where there isn't harmful state-sponsored disinformation or misinformation, but they don't do it. And that's because it's sort of been accepted in the business world and everywhere else. Well, you don't want to screw up their profit margins by having them either hire more people to screen the content or accept less people. Again, you would tell the movie theater, well, you just gotta, you gotta build a bigger movie theater. Or you would tell the restaurant, you got to build a bigger restaurant, or you've got to, raise your prices or do something, but you can't have 600 people in a place that's only safe for 140 people. You can't do it. So Facebook today could be sued by the FTC, could have been sued by the FTC, and they never have been, because the whole mindset, even that's infected people, I guess, at the FTC is that, well, that's just the nature of online platforms. Why?
That's a great question. That's a great question. So, enforcing the terms of service. You've also,
or you could change Section 230 also, but up to now, Congress in recent years has proven itself unable to name a post office, let alone really significant legislation about this stuff.
So I have you note requiring reporting of where programmatic ads show up, but I wanted to get your thoughts on, are we in an ad bubble? Because I think we are.
Are we in a what bubble?
An ad bubble, where the value of the ads is not commensurate with what is being paid for them.
Oh, for sure. I mean, but of course, the problem is, as you well know, is you don't know what the value is, and you don't even know the relative value. And again, one of the promises, ironically, of programmatic advertising, online advertising, is it does produce all kinds of metrics, right? So if I have an ad on a broadcast television show, if it's a 30-second spot that runs for as one of 6 ads during a 2 or 3 minute commercial break, or 10 ads during a break, and it runs in the middle, what I am told is what's the rating of the television show, which itself is an inexact rating, but I'm certainly not told what the rating is of the third ad that runs as part of a series of 6 ads on the television show, even though every person who's in our audience today knows that with the advent of remote control, when an ad comes on, we go, we flip to something else until we think the ads are over, right? So the glory of online advertising, of programmatic advertising, was, well, you get these metrics. How many people click through?
But they're not real in many cases.
But they're not real. And in fact, there've been all kinds of scandals over the years of, legions of people in third world countries being, paid just to click through on an ad to create, click-throughs. Now you can do it with bots. There's that, but then you have no idea whether the people who are clicking through are the kinds of people who can and will buy your product. What is reasonably true is that actually high quality content, especially news content, does perform better. So the San Francisco Chronicle, I guarantee you, performs better than the Santa Monica Observer, because there are more serious people taking the content more seriously, and that's a better environment for the ad to be on. Leaving aside the embarrassment of my ad being next to something, that says that about Nancy Pelosi's husband. Just as a general matter, it's not an environment where your ad's going to work. So, but the real bubble we're in is that so much of this is now programmatic advertising that high quality, journalism loses out. We tracked at NewsGuard $2.6 billion. This is like 2 years ago, so it's obviously up. $2.6 billion in advertising going to sites that got our lowest ratings. Of that, about 1.6 or 1.8 billion was in the United States. If you look at the ad revenue of all the online ad revenue of all the local newspapers in the United States, the legitimate ones, that if that revenue instead went to them, they would have had 40 to 50% more revenue.
Wow. That's stunning.
So the double whammy here is not only is the bad stuff being supported by advertisers who have no idea that they're supporting it, but it's being supported at the expense of the good stuff, which is not getting the support. Again, the San Francisco Chronicle didn't get those ads that went to the Santa Monica Observer. That's a real.
It's really sad. I mean, another thing that you said, and I'm a big believer in this as well, is having more approval voting rather than or top two primary voting.
Yeah, when I get into the politics of this toward the end, what exacerbates everything or feeds off of everything is, are two things. One is gerrymandering. Gerrymandering is sort of the political equivalent of the online platforms of their algorithm. Because what gerrymandering does is it huddles all the people who believe on one side or the other into the same congressional district or legislative district. So therefore, your goal, if you want to run for office, is to win a Republican primary or a Democratic primary, because you're probably running in a district where whoever the Democrat is or whoever the Republican is going to win, because with gerrymandering, there aren't, bipartisan districts by and large. So that's the first thing is, if I want to be, a congressman from, XYZ area, which is 85%, Democratic or 70% Democratic, I have to run the Democratic primary, and the people who show up for primaries are the most avid Democrats or Republicans, and therefore I have to take the most avid, Democratic or Republican lines. So that's the first thing. It's the primaries is gerrymandering. Then, the primaries are winner take all. So the only thing you care about is I got to appeal to the Republicans. If you instead have a primary be just the top two vote getters from both parties or from all parties, you end up with people having to appeal to more than just the base, because you're not going to end up in the top two.
I love that. Well, our time is just about up. So what advice would you give people? Where should they go to learn more? Obviously, you can buy the book. The book is The Death of Truth.
Well, newsguardtech.com is our website, which has a lot of information.
Great.
And we'd love to have more visits. We also have what has now become really a spectacularly popular Substack called Reality Check, which we publish 3 or 4 times a week, although it's been pretty much almost every day lately. And that is, you can find that at either realitycheck.com or at Substack, or if you go to newsguardtech.com, you'll see how you can sign up for it. And we'd love to have more people looking at it.
Well, I'd love to get the good word out. Thank you so much for taking time on what I know must be an incredibly hectic week.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Nice to be with you.
Bye-bye.